So this is a talk which is mentioned as BrainScaleS integration. Initiate your emulations via the Collaboratory in the agenda. I will also give a bit of information about what happened in the past year regarding our software and hardware. And to start up, maybe I give a very short reminder about BrainScaleS. BrainScaleS is a mixed signal implementation of neuromorphic hardware. So this means we implement neurons as analog circuits or mixed signal circuits. So they are digital parts, but they are also analog parts. And we have synapses that are also implemented as mixed signal circuits. In total, the system runs in accelerated time compared to the biological model. So this means we have approximately a factor of 1000 faster dynamics. So time constants of the membrane are in the order of 10 microseconds instead of 10 milliseconds. We support adaptive exponential integrated fire neurons. We have short-term plasticity implemented. We have massive parallel correlation sensors implemented in the synapses. We have access to multiple types of observables on the system, and we also have controllables that can be modified during the network operation in a smooth fashion. So, for example, if you update neuron parameters, in principle, this is possible during the experiment runtime. Plasticity in this system is programmable as long as you are okay with the amount of observables that are available. As long as they suffice for your plasticity rule, it's okay. The system itself also supports structured neurons and nonlinear effects of dendrites. And there's also non-spiking operation mode. So this can be also used as an inference artificial neural network accelerator. There are currently in the lab 3 systems for eBrains users. There are 2 systems available in principle. There are mobile systems that's shown in the lower left here. They are approximately the size of a credit card. They are a bit thicker, like I think 3 centimeters, but the width and height of the system is approximately a credit card. They are intended for embedded operation. We have lab systems, single chip systems for local and remote users. And we are currently working on a system which is called Frankenstein, which is basically a multi-chip system. They work generally as network-attached accelerators, except for the embedded system, but the other ones are network-attached accelerators. So this means you can access them via Ethernet, gigabit Ethernet, or 10 gigabit Ethernet. And in the Frankenstein system, there will be also an XTOL-based communication mode. The software stack provides multiple extraction layers. I have a short slide later, but here it's about time. And obviously this is a time-shared hardware resource because there might be many users and they want to share the same resource. So what's configurable on the system? Obviously, we have to configure synapses, weights, and things like this, neuron parameters. We have on-chip and off-chip input and output. We have, as I mentioned before, observables and controllables. And there may be multiple controllers. And by controller, I mean basically actively configuring components in the system. So the host computer might perform read operations, write operations during experiment runtime. The FPGA might do the same thing. And the embedded processors that we have on the chip might also perform active things. In principle, this is a graph. To configure the system, this is a graph mapping problem. So we have, let's say, populations on the left, population A, population B. We have projection between these populations. We can map those to a hardware configuration and arrive at an initial experiment description. And by initial, I mean this is basically the start of the experiment, because plasticity might change the topology. Structured plasticity might change the topology, or at least parameters of projections on neurons. So there are basically 2 things that we have to compute by software, and that's the initial configuration. And the second part is basically the dynamics and I/O protocol that happens during the experiment real time. If we look at this in an abstract way, basically we have time running from top to bottom. We have the host computer. that computes a static configuration and also basically a program for the real-time operation. We send the data down to the system, we execute the real-time program, and we read back, we get back the responses from the system. And I said there might be multiple computers. This picture is just for a host computer for simplicity. In a whole, to timeshare such a system, we need basically a scheduler that knows about all these details. So when is it allowed to run a new experiment? What has to be done if a user switches or if an experiment session switches? And for this, we developed multiple solutions for scheduling. The initial one was based on Slurm. This is basically just batch scheduling. So we have the full experiment, pre-processing, the real-time run, and the post-processing as a single Slurm job, and Slurm manages the hardware resource. So we have basically jobs that just run each after the other job. And that's obviously not the most efficient way to use hardware, because some part of the job is not using the hardware, but only doing software work. And for this, we implemented a micro-scheduling service, which is called Quickledy. That's Oliver Breitwieser's work, and it's also described in his PhD thesis, chapter 2-10. And this service here knows about what parts of the experiments are basically static configuration, which parts are the real-time operation of the system, and it packs together these experiments to a compressed experiment runtime, and this increases the overall throughput for experiments, because the software parts can be run on a different host computer. So we basically can scale out better by using this service. This service can be also used from eBrains, and we support this because our software stack is layered in we try to have clean layering, and we basically have the wide gap. The small gap between the communication and the hardware abstraction layer here is basically where this experiment scheduling service Quickledy from the slide before operates. And this basically allows us to just make use of the API that we have here, which is serializable. The data structures are serializable, and we can just use this as an TCP experiment service and communicate basically experiments between two machines. Yeah, one machine is just steering the hardware, and the other machine is running all the software, the yellow part, the green part, and this light bluish part, and it communicates with the hardware execution service. And this is basically what happens for eBrains. So we just injected basically everything which is above this low blue box as a software component into the eBrains software environment, and allow for TCP connections to Heidelberg, and just run experiments and return back the data to eBrains. The overall software stack, so this is Christian Mauch, an unpublished PhD thesis, so this will be published hopefully in 2 weeks. We have also done other work in the past year. One of these areas is software support for multi-compartment neurons. So our hardware allows us to interconnect neuron circuits in a way that they build basically multi-compartment neurons. For example, this tree structure can be realized by this tree structure comprised of 4 compartments, can be realized by 5 hardware circuits. There's also a low-level API to describe the morphology of such a multi-compartment neuron. On the left side, you can see this. This is ongoing work by Raphael Stock and also Jakob Kaiser. We also have a publication out. Jakob Kaiser is the first author, which implements and demonstrates multiple topologies implemented on our hardware system. And this uses basically Pine for the experiments. We also hope, and that was part of the discussion this morning, we also hope to work on the multi-compartment branch of Pine soon, to allow for more expressive description of the morphologies directly in Pine. Another area which is actively worked on are plasticity rules. So our system, as I said before on the first slides, allows for programmable plasticity. And in this case, this means that our system runs C++ code. In the past, users had to just write their C++ code, compile it, and write the software for the host component and try to synchronize these two code parts in some way. We now started to integrate basically this in a very simple fashion into Pine. And we do this by basically deriving from Pine classes. So for example, this homeostatic synapse class is also derived from a static synapse. And it implements basically a plasticity kernel. And this kernel now is parameterized. And this parameterization is basically a representation of which projections are really plastic in this homeostatic way. And the software knows about which synapses, where the synapses lie on the hardware system. And this parameterization happens automatically, which is basically a big step compared to the past, where the users had to know where the synapse, where the synapses lie on the hardware system. And this is also integrated. So basically in Pine, you would have an instantiated object of this type, and you pass it in your projection as a synapse type, and the software just works and performs all the conversions. And to conclude, basically my talk, we now have a native and natural integration of BrainScaleS 2 into the eBrains Collabs. We provide the software as part of the eBrains software distribution. Maybe that's not the term other people use until now, but I think it's the eBrains software distribution that we created here. Hardware access is possible via this Quickly Experiment service. And this will also cover future eBrains HPC deployments. So as soon as we have our eBrains software distribution also deployed onto HPC sites, it will be possible to run interactive hardware experiments on BrainScaleS 2 directly from the HPC sites, which will be also nice for multi-site workflows. Recent progress, software-wise and hardware commissioning-wise, are multi-compartment and this programmable plasticity things in Pine. We also work on these XTOL-based multi-chip systems. We also have quite some progress in our executable documentation, including examples. We now try to provide examples for all different kinds of use cases that were developed in the past. And the idea is to really get to a flatter learning curve for our hardware users. And that's just an announcement. Jakob will host an interactive BrainScaleS 2 Collab demo later today. So mark this in your calendar. So this evening, there will be a demo. And that's the team. And I probably missed a lot of people. So don't be mad at me.